Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here with my 2-year BookTube Q&A. In early April, as you guys know, I celebrated my 2-year BookTube birthday, if you want to call it that, or BookTube anniversary. And so to celebrate, I decided to do a Q&A and asked you guys to ask me some questions, and you did. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and start answering your questions. Okay, so the first question I have is from, I'm probably going to say your name wrong and I apologize. It's from Terrell Bellinger, sorry, asked, can you pick 3 criminally underrated authors that you wish should deserve more praise and recognition on BookTube? Okay, the first one that immediately pops into my mind is Michael McDowell. Horror writer. He was also a screenplay writer. I believe he wrote the screenplay for Beetlejuice. And he also had something to do with The Nightmare Before Christmas, I believe. So he dabbled in some movies, but he also wrote horror novels, and I've read 2 of them, and they're fantastic. And I feel like, though I did hear about him from another booktuber, I don't hear a ton of people talk about him, and I think he's very underrated because he had a lot of talent. Unfortunately, he passed away, gosh, I think it was like almost 20 years ago. But he was a very talented writer, and I'm excited that I haven't gotten through his whole, collection of books yet, that I'm still working my way through them. But yeah, he's a talent that I wish people talked more about. Another writer that I adore that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, not a ton anyway, is Hunter S. Thompson. He is a nonfiction writer. That may be why. He did write, I believe, The Rum Diary is a work of fiction that I have read, but he hasn't written a ton of fiction. That might be the only one. Most of his stuff is nonfiction, so that might be why he doesn't get talked about a lot, but I feel like he is a very gifted writer, and he's one of my favorites, and I really wish people talked about him more. A third one, gosh, I don't know. Who's the third author that doesn't get talked about? I'm going to look at my shelves to kind of help me out. That doesn't really get talked about, but should. Honestly, I've been sitting here brainstorming and I cannot think of a third one. I'm so sorry. It'll come to me eventually. But there's 2 anyway. There's 2 for you. And Terrell also asked, what's your favorite TV show that sadly got canceled way too soon? The biggest one I can think of, it's gonna take you way back to the 90s. There was a show called My So-Called Life, and I loved it. I loved that show. It had Claire Danes, Jared Leto, and Claire Danes was the main character. She played a girl named Angela. It was kind of like a teenage drama, but I was obsessed with it, and it was only on for 1 season. I think there's only 12 episodes, and it never went on to do more than that. And I think the rumor was that Claire Danes wanted to move more into film and kind of go that route, and since she was the main character, but I don't know if that's true. But I loved that show. I thought that it talked about a lot of topics, a lot of stuff having to do with the normal teen stuff, like sex, drug use. It also dealt a lot with LGBTQIA stuff, which I thought, for mid-90s is amazing, because one of the main characters was gay, and I loved him, Ricky. He was great. I liked that Angela was she was a kind of a angsty teen a little bit, but she had a good relationship with her parents for the most part, and I liked that her parents were also a part of the show, and you kind of got a peek into their life as well. I liked that kind of thing. And I really wish they had done more with it because I loved that show. And it's been on Netflix and stuff. I've rewatched it a bunch of times. It's a great show. If you haven't watched My So-Called Life, you should totally check it out. It's awesome. Okay, and then Terrell asked quite a few questions. What was the first YA series you've ever read? And I think besides Fear Street and Goosebumps, because I read a bunch of those when I was a kid, I would say probably the first series, because YA wasn't a big thing when I was actually the age to be reading YA. I would say probably Harry Potter. I first read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in 10th grade, and I binge read the first 3 books, I think. And I remember I had to wait for the 4th book to come out, and I think I was in college when it came out. Like, it was like my first semester of college, I believe. I think. So yeah, that was probably the first series that I read that I can think of besides like Goosebumps and Fear Street. And then, what's your all-time favorite Disney animated movie? Whew, that's a tough one because I got a few. I don't know if I can pick just one. Definitely Aladdin is like top 3 because it kind of changes, you know. I would say Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Alice in Wonderland, and probably another one I really loved was Robin Hood. I loved that movie. So it kind of changes. I would say though for the most part probably Aladdin because I love the music, I love the story. Robin Williams as the genie was fantastic. He's so funny. He was great in that movie. Yeah, Aladdin probably if I had to pick, but it changes, you know. Oh, and then like The Little Mermaid. How could I forget The Little Mermaid? Yeah, so it just kind of depends on the day. Yeah. And then the last question from Terrell is, what's your least favorite Disney animated movie? And I don't think I've ever watched like a bad Disney animated movie. I would say the one that I probably would say, it's not that it's a bad movie, just that I just don't have like any sort of nostalgia or connection to, is probably Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I never watched it as a kid. It was just like, we just didn't have that one on VHS, and we just like never watched it. So when I watched it, I was much older, and it didn't really do anything for me. The music and the story, I actually thought it was kind of boring actually, but I mean, obviously now it's like 80 years old, so it's a really old one. But yeah, it just didn't really do anything for me. I would say probably Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The next question is from Cora Johnston. She asked, what's your favorite thing about the BookTube community? Definitely interacting with you guys, my subscribers, and also other booktubers. That's the whole reason I joined BookTube, was because I wanted to talk to other people that love reading as much as I do. And I have totally found people within this community. And it's a great community. I think that for the most part, we are all very nice. And we get along well, and we respect each other's opinions, and it's very pleasant and welcoming, and I really love it. So that's probably my favorite thing. Okay, the next question is from Francine K. And let's see, she asked, what strategies, if any, do you use when dealing with a book you are loving that is a challenging maze of characters and plot? Okay, that doesn't happen too often, but when I do come across a book that I am enjoying, but that is very maybe dense or has a ton of characters to sort through, for me, I find that the best thing to do is to read in smaller increments. Like a typical book, I probably read anywhere from 50 to 70 pages a day when I'm reading. That's like what I can usually squeeze in a day. But if the book is really dense, for example, if it's like a classic or something that's just kind of hard to really get into, I find if I read like 20 to 30 pages a day of that book, I can process it better because I'm just taking in less and I can just process it more. Also, it never hurts to take notes, especially if there's a lot of characters, to like write them down and to kind of see how they all interact. That's definitely helpful. And sometimes for me, if the language itself is hard, and kind of hard for me to grasp or it's not sinking in, I find reading out loud helps with that. I know it's weird, but I do it. I do it, especially with classics, because for some reason it just helps my brain process better. Okay, the next question is from Books and Jams, and she asked, what is a book you probably wouldn't have read if you weren't on BookTube? That's pretty much an easy one. I will say The Secret Keeper by Kate Morton, because until I joined BookTube, I had never heard of Kate Morton. And then when I heard about her, I decided I had to check her out. And The Secret Keeper was the first Kate Morton book I read. I have since now read 2. I've read The Secret Keeper and The Clockmaker's Daughter, and they're both great books. Historical fiction / mystery. Yeah, kind of slow burn type of books, but they're always very satisfying. At least the 2 I've read have been. And I would have never discovered her if it wasn't for BookTube. And then Krista, Books and Jams, also asked me, how did you meet your husband? We met in high school. Actually, we were seniors in high school when we met. And yeah, we kind of met through friends. He hung out with one of my best friends and neighbors. She has a younger brother who is, well, they're a set of twins. But the one that Austin was friends with, they're only a year younger than us. So he started hanging out with him, and so he would come over to my friend's house, and we all kind of hung out together. So that was kind of how I met him. And then, yeah, we fell in love, and the rest is history. Then Peggy Mibb asked me, how do you find time to raise a family, read books, and film BookTube? I would say, how do I find time? I think in terms of reading, it's fairly easy for me because I really, really love it, and I don't really have any other hobbies that like take up my time. Like, I know some people like to read, but they also, let's say, crochet or scrapbook or those sorts of things, and I don't really have any other of those type of hobbies. Reading is pretty much it, and I don't watch a ton of TV. I mean, I have a few TV shows that I do like to watch, and I do watch Netflix when I kind of need a break from reading, but pretty much any time that I have a spare minute to myself, I read. 10 minutes here and there, or if I get a nice chunky block of time, that's great too. But that's usually what I do with my free time, is reading. So it's fairly easy to have the time because I don't have a ton of other things that I'm also trying to do hobby-wise. And in terms of filming, I try to film on the weekends when my husband's here, so that if the kids are up and about, he can distract them while I film. Otherwise, I wait until nap time, because Hunter will nap and Leia kind of has like her quiet time. I'll set her up with like some Play-Doh or some watercolor paints, and she'll kind of go to town, and then I can sneak away and film a quick video. That's kind of the way we do it. So it works out. I think I make the time because I really love it and I want to do it. So yeah. The next question is from Stephanie at That's What She Read, and she asked, what was a book that defined your teen years? One of the first books that I read as a teen that I think really like wowed me, and I have like very fond nostalgia for, is when I read It by Stephen King. I read it when I was 17. It was the summer between junior and senior year, and it was a book I'd been wanting to tackle but was intimidated by because it's huge, and I, being 17, didn't really have any commitments as far as job or anything like that. So every morning I would wake up, and for like 3 hours every morning I would lay in bed and read that book, and it blew me away. And I finished it really quickly that way because I couldn't put it down. And I remember just it'd be like 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm laying in bed reading this book, and I was like, there were parts where I was genuinely creeped out, even though it was like broad daylight and all that stuff. It was a great book. I haven't read it since. I really want to reread it because I think I'm still going to love it, but I want to just see if it has held up to the test of time, you know? But I really loved that book, and it really kind of solidified my adoration for Stephen King, and I really started to read more of his books after that. Before that, I kind of read his books sporadically, but then I really started to try to read more of him, so yeah. And then I think she also asked me another question. Yes, she did. What's a genre you want to get more into? I don't know if there is really another genre, because I am a pretty eclectic reader. You know, I read a little bit of everything except fantasy and romance. Those two are just ones that they're just not my cup of tea. I've tried, and I can sometimes do fantasy, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around it, to be honest. And then romance, I just don't, I don't know why, I just don't get anything out of romances. I know some people really enjoy them, and I'm not knocking them at all. It's just, they're just not for me. So there isn't really a genre that I want to get more into. Maybe classics. I think I would like to read more classics on a regular basis because I don't read a ton of them, but there are a ton out there that I haven't read, so maybe classics, that's what I'll say. And then she also asked me, what's a cliche in books that you hate? Insta love is one that I'm not a fan of. But like I just said, romance in general kind of, I could do without it, you know? A thing that I really don't like in books, and you see it in YA a lot, is like the girl falls for the bad guy. Like he starts out bad, like, you know, he treats her like shit, and you know, he disrespects her, or like he's just not a good person, but then he turns himself around and then she falls for him because now he's a good guy. And I just don't really like that because I don't think it's realistic. I'm like, if a guy's an asshole, he's an asshole. Like, you're not going to change him. You know what I'm saying? I think it sends the wrong message, I think, to especially younger girls reading those books, thinking that that could happen to them. So yeah, it's kind of a dangerous trope to me that I'm not a big fan of. Yeah. The return cart asked me, what would you consider a good introductory book into the horror genre? And I would say if you're looking to get into horror, I would go with a well-known author like Stephen King, only because the books are easily accessible. You can get it from the library. Most of his books you can get at the library. And many of them are, I think, easily digestible for somebody that doesn't normally like horror. One that I always recommend to people who are maybe looking to dive into Stephen King and just Stephen King in general, but are kind of intimidated or not sure where to go, I always recommend Salem's Lot because it is one of his shorter books. I mean, it's not super long, and it's a vampire story, so you can't really go wrong with a vampire story. That's a very, like, well done, known thing in horror books. That book basically explores the idea of, like, what would happen if Dracula came to a small New England town, you know? And I really enjoyed that book. I thought it was really fun. It's another one that I really want to reread someday, and one that, like I said, I recommend to people not only looking to read Stephen King, but just horror in general, because it's like a classic kind of vampire story. Yeah, it's good. Carol Marie Reeds asked, did you always love horror? Did you grow up on it or discover it once you got older? I've always been a fan of scary stuff, scary movies. I loved going, like, in Michigan anyway, like, going haunted housing around Halloween is, like, a big deal. And, like, haunted hay rides and, like, all that kind of stuff. Corn mazes. I, like, live for that stuff. I love it. And like I said, love scary movies. But I didn't really, before BookTube, I didn't really read a ton of horror books because I think my scope was just so limited. I was like, okay, I would say, like, before BookTube, I mostly read, in terms of horror authors, I read, like, Stephen King, Anne Rice, Edgar Allan Poe. That's probably it. I mean, like, I just didn't know that this whole genre and subgenres existed. So I'm still kind of, like, learning about the genre and seeing just how many books are out there. And I'm really enjoying it because I love to be scared and I love to read scary stuff, but for so many years I was, like, in the dark about what was out there. So, but yes, I've always loved the scary stuff. And Molly Pedigo, I think is how you say it, she asked, do you like nonfiction? What's your favorite nonfiction book? I do love nonfiction. I read a lot of nonfiction, actually. I try to read as much of it as I can because I like to educate myself, you know. I'm no longer in school, and I think that at my core, though, I am, like, a student. I want to always try to be learning things. That's why I think I'm a reader. In nonfiction books, I learn all kinds of things about all kinds of topics. My favorite nonfiction book is probably a memoir called Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. That's one of the early nonfiction books I remember reading, and I just absolutely loved it. Frank McCourt's writing was equal parts heartbreaking and funny. Just had a great way of telling a story, and I just loved it. And like I've mentioned before, I'm also a huge fan of Hunter S. Thompson, and most of his books are nonfiction. I would say Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is up there. That's one of his most famous books. Yeah, probably those two. Okay, Jamie Kutu, I think is how you say it. She asked, what was the first book you talked about on your channel? Have your feelings on that book changed at all in the last 2 years? You know what, I'm gonna have to go look and see what the first book was. I know my very first video was a book haul. Let me go check it. Let me check and see what the first book was that I talked about. So give me 1 second. Okay, so my second video on my channel was a standalone book review of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And I really enjoyed that book. I gave it 4 stars, and I would say 2 years later, I still think it's a really good book. It's told from the perspective of a teenage boy who has autism, and I don't know anybody who's autistic in my daily life, and I felt like that book gave me a glimpse into what autism can be like for some people, because I know there's such a spectrum there, and it's so different and for each person. But reading that story really opened my eyes to, one way that this particular autistic person sees the world. And it was very informative and eye-opening, and the story was very, it kind of hit the feels a little bit. I would recommend that one. Yeah, it was a good book, and I still really like it. Okay, the next question comes from Beth E., and she asked, what was your favorite book in elementary school? In elementary school, I remember being just crazy for the Goosebumps books. When we would get like the Scholastic book order things, I think it was like once a month? I think we would get those. And if there was a Goosebumps book in there, I was like getting that Goosebumps book. I like loved them. And then I read all the Fear Street books after that. And then from Fear Street, I kind of, went on to reading like Stephen King and stuff. But those Goosebumps books were so fun. I remember really, really enjoying The Haunted Mask, I believe is what it was called. I really liked that one, and I actually reread it a couple years ago, and it was still pretty good. So, I mean, R.L. Stine and his Goosebumps, and like the way that he does chapters with like the cliffhanger at the end of like every chapter, where you're just like, I gotta just read this book. That's yeah, very fun memories there. Definitely Goosebumps. And then I also first read Little Women when I was in elementary school. After I saw the movie that has Winona Ryder in it, I wanted to read the book, and I think the version I read may have been like an abridged version, like geared more towards children, but I loved it. And it was like, I kind of fell in love with that book, and I still consider it a favorite today. Kay Fleck asked, how do you usually decide what you will read next? And I would say, usually I go by my mood. I kind of look at my bookshelves and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of feeling this, I'm kind of feeling this. And then obviously if I have books planned, like buddy reads and stuff, obviously those are planned, and yeah. And then I'm also a seasonal reader. So like if a book gives me summer vibes, I'll save it for summertime. So like, for example, right now on my TBR shelf, I have The Ruins by Scott Smith. When I recently bought it, and I was like, this is like a summer vibes kind of book, because it takes place in Mexico, so it's like hot and, humid, and it just kind of gave me summer vibes. So I'm like, I'm gonna save that for summertime. So that's like my plan for that. That's kind of the way I do it. I like to save some of my spooky books for obviously like Halloween time and stuff like that. So seasons definitely play a factor as well in my reading choices. And then Game of Tomes asked me, would you tell us about your wedding? Of course I will. I got married on September 23rd, 2011. My husband and I had been together about 10 years then, almost 10 years, and we wanted a fall wedding, and I wanted to have my ceremony outside. So the hall that we picked had a really pretty little like garden, little area with like a gazebo and all that stuff. And that was like the selling point for me in terms of like wanting to have the wedding there. And so we booked it and all that, and then the wedding day came and it was raining all day long. And the whole day I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna get my outside ceremony. And I was really, getting bummed. Even on the way to the place, I was in the limo like with my girls and it was still raining, and I was like eyes glued to like the radar on like the weather app on my phone, like, okay, is it gonna stop? Is it gonna stop? And like literally our ceremony was at 5:30 and I think it stopped raining at like 5:10. And when we got there, the like kind of banquet hall lady, or who ran the show or whatever, she had all the chairs and stuff set up, and she was like, they're a little wet, I can dry them off. If you guys still want to do it outside, let's do it. And I was like, yes, let's do it. So it happened, the clouds parted and I ended up having my outside ceremony. Although it was a little chilly, it was only like 55 degrees out. It was exactly what I wanted. It was beautiful. Yes. And then kind of another memorable moment for the reception was doing my dance with my dad, because it was just like the funnest thing ever, because we when we chose our song, we chose My Girl, because my dad's like, I don't want a sad, sappy song. I don't want to be crying in front of everybody. So I was like, okay, yeah, we'll do an upbeat song. It'll be fun. It'll be cute. And we did My Girl. And granted, he did have a couple of drinks before to kind of calm the nerves or whatever. But when we got out there, my dad started cutting a rug like I've never seen it in my life. And I did not even know what to do. I was just like, what is going on? And we were like dancing, and it was so fun. And I mean, everybody watching was like totally like getting into it and cheering us on, because he was just like, he had some moves going. And at one point he even like was walking backwards and he fell, but he kind of like caught himself. So like he trying to make it look like he planned to fall, like it was choreographed or something. And I was dying. And actually the photographer caught a picture of it. If I can find it, I'll try to like insert it here, because she caught a picture of my dad and he's on the ground, but he's like got his fist up like, yeah, I meant to do that. And I'm like reaching for him, like laughing, like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it was a really good memory. And probably like the highlight of the reception for me was that dance with my dad. So the next question is from Hey Little Thrifter, and she asked, what is a book you love that doesn't get talked about much on BookTube? And for that, I'm going to go back to Hunter S. Thompson, because I don't think he gets talked about much in general on BookTube, but he has a book that is called Hell's Angels. It's a nonfiction book, and it's about the motorcycle gang, the Hells Angels, and he, back in the late 60s, he kind of, he didn't join their gang, but he followed them around for a time, and was writing this book. And at the time, the Hells Angels had this reputation for, being like violent and using drugs and raping women and all this kind of stuff, and he wanted to kind of investigate it. And it actually ended up being a really good book. If you're looking for a good nonfiction book, I would say Hells Angels is really good, and I don't think I've heard anybody talk about it on BookTube, so there you go. Okay, then we have Victor Garibaldi, and he asked, what's your favorite bookstore to visit in New York City? I have only been to New York City twice in my life. The first time was 2 years ago, and what was the name of it? There was a bookstore there that I loved. I think I have a bookmark. Let me see if I can grab it. Yeah, so the bookstore was called Housing Works Bookstore Cafe, and the books in there were gently used. I think they might have had new ones in there too, but I think the majority of them were used. So it was really fun to just kind of like browse around. There were 2 levels, and then there's like a little cafe in there. And what was really cool about it, and I'll just read the back of the bookmark, because it'll explain it better than I can. It says, Housing Works Bookstore Cafe is a social enterprise and event venue that raises money to support Housing Works life-saving services for people living with HIV and AIDS in New York City, and its political advocacy work to end AIDS as an epidemic in New York State by 2020, in the United States by 2025, and worldwide by 2030. We use great books, great drinks, and great creative programs to make sure all New Yorkers get adequate health care, including housing, regardless of their incomes, HIV status, gender, sexuality, or race. So it's a good bookstore, supporting a good cause, and I really loved it, and I will definitely return there when I go back to NYC someday. And the last question is from Beth McCraw, and she asked, what's your favorite genre, favorite book? Oh goodness. Oh, like I said before, I'm kind of a eclectic reader. I read a lot of genres, and so it's hard. I would say horror/thrillers, mysteries, but then I also like nonfiction. I also like contemporaries. I also like a little bit of classics. I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place. I don't think I can pick a genre. Probably horror or thriller. Horror or thriller is probably my favorite. Favorite book? Oh, I have a ton, and it depends on what genre. But if you had to say what's your favorite horror book, if I'm gonna say that's my favorite genre, I would say my favorite horror book, that's another one I can't really pick just one, it depends on the day. It by Stephen King, Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, The Elementals by Michael McDowell, The Stand by Stephen King, yeah, I don't know. There's so many. All right, guys, if you're still here, thank you for sitting here and listening to me babble for a stretch of time. I hope you enjoyed this Q&A and got to know a little bit more about me. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. I really appreciate that, and I really enjoyed answering them. Yeah, I'm glad that after 2 years on BookTube, I'm still here, and I don't plan on going anywhere, so yeah. It's been a fun 2 years, and I'm glad that you guys have been here to celebrate with me with this little Q&A. So, with that said, I hope that you guys are having a wonderful day, and I will chat with you very soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.